The Mississippi Mud Mongrel. Dear Scary Stories NYC. I never saw any kind of monster or ghost or weird thing in my life ever. Except for the one creepy night when my girlfriend and I got messed with by a big old upright walking dog creature completely covered in mud. We were driving on Fort Adams Pond Road, and I understand that the word pond is literally in the name of the street, but the direction the creature man emerged from was not, to my knowledge, the direction of any large body of water. We were driving toward the Clark Creek Natural Area, but that was in front of us, not to our right. When I look at a satellite map, it sure looks like nothing but woods in all directions around that road, but clearly there was mud aplenty in those woods the night when our personal event happened to us. Now, we're talking Woodville, Mississippi here. And we're talking about Fort Adams Pond Road, which is pretty rural. It's sort of almost more like a path through the woods than a bona fide road. And we used it in those days as a kind of impromptu lover's lane. If you knew the good spots, you could hide your car in the trees, and the local authorities couldn't even see you guys hiding in there. We felt invisible when we found a good parking spot open, and we felt increasingly invincible each time we got away with our little private parties. The only trouble was we were neither invisible nor invincible when it came to facing the Woodville werewolf, as my girlfriend used to sometimes call it. She was a drama major, not sure if you can tell. Anyway, it's not like you can really blame her for being dramatic about this subject. We're talking about a big old dog that stood up like a man, but was too stupid to wash the mud off of himself. And he came and got that mud all over my father's car, which cost me time and money I could not afford to clean up. It could have been worse, but at that age, every penny needed to be stretched. I mean, it probably wasn't as bad as it is now, of course, but I was only working part-time. I had to cover a lot of my own school expenses. My girlfriend and I actually had an argument about that. She claimed that she was worried about me in that moment, while all I was worried about was how I was going to pay for our car wash. You can see why we didn't date for too much longer after that. We were both dramatic, but in different ways that were not complementary to each other. Okay, I'll quit stalling now. It still freaks me out to remember the details of all this, so I always joke around and sidetrack myself before diving into it again. The girlfriend and I were in the woods just off the road, hidden away from law enforcement, doing our duty as healthy American youth, in the back seat of my father's car, which, as he always reminded me, was not paid off yet. From outside came a noise as though someone were walking through the trees and coming toward us. Needless to say, we were quite surprised and alarmed by this occurrence, and took pains to make ourselves more presentable as quickly as we could manage. We had somehow already climbed back into the front seats of the car, and I was fumbling for the keys, which for some reason I had stupidly taken out of the ignition. Maybe I was just distracted by finally having some time alone with my steady, and I took the keys out as though we were home and put them in my pocket. So while I was doing that, my heart was going pretty fast already. Suddenly, the girlfriend screamed out loud, almost making me deaf in my right ear. I had just gotten the keys out of my pocket when she shouted, which caused me to flip them into the air, off the car interior roof, and somewhere into the back seat, before I even knew what all the shouting was about. That was the moment I saw the dog-headed man covered in mud. I mean, he was advancing toward us from the front out of some trees. I had stupidly left the headlights on, which now I was grateful for. I could see him from the knees on upward. He was just caked in mud over much of his body, so he reminded me of a golem as he trudged forward. The head was the least covered in mud, but it did appear to have been recently very drenched, and was still dripping wet with dirty water. I don't know what color its fur might have normally been, but the parts not covered by mud were tinted a greenish-brownish combination of shades, similar to that of the encasing mud itself. As it drew closer to us, the body got better lit, and the tall-eared canine head moved into shadow. When the head was in darkened silhouette, the eyes glowed even more brightly and fiercely than before, giving this thing a truly horrific appearance. I had been thinking that the worst-case scenario was that it was cops coming through the woods to hassle us and maybe give us a ticket or take us in. I was not considering the possibility that a dog-headed man, bigger than Lurch from the Addams Family, was gonna stroll over to say hi. Actually, by his behavior and temperament, I'd say he strolled over to tell us to get off his lawn. He was not a happy camper by the looks of him, and to the accompaniment of my screaming girlfriend, he began pounding out a beat on the hood and sides of my dad's car. The girlfriend was thinking that we were gonna bite the big one, but I was screeching about how he better not be leaving dents, because I couldn't afford to fix dents on top of paying for the car to be washed. I can remember how afraid I was of debt back when I was a kid. If only I knew how much worse it could get than having to have a few dents pounded out. Now, as I had said, I had stupidly and nervously tossed the car keys into the back, and so I climbed over in between the front seats, the top half of me looking around back there, while my butt was up near the roof. I saw the keys down on the floor at a spot that I thought I could reach, and I made a full extension to snag them. Just as I got my fingertips on those little jangly keys to freedom, the dogman began rocking the car, trying to tip us over sideways. I ended up wrenching my lower back and fell mostly into the back seat in a great deal of pain and too seized up to move very much. We were in deep trouble. So my girlfriend at that time could drive. I knew she could. I had first asked her out after we took a driver's ed class together. The thing is, I had gotten my license while for some reason she had never even gotten a permit to continue driving. So I tossed her the keys from the back seat, and I asked her to drive us out of there since my back hurt too much to sit up. She panicked, saying she didn't legally have the right to drive. She told me that she might get us both in trouble if she got behind the wheel. I reminded her that we'd be safer in the county lockup than we were in that grove of woods off the road, about to be tipped over sideways by an 8 or 9 foot tall dog monster. I don't think I phrased it as politely as all that, but she got my message, and soon she was behind the driver's wheel, putting the car in gear, all the while crying hysterically that we were going to die, over and over again. Finally, I told her yes, we will die, but not for a number of years yet, so please drive the stupid car. She was a better student in driver's ed than any of the rest of us, so I needed her to cut the crap and sort of fast and furious us out of those woods before we ended up Alpo. Well, she started backing up, and the dog started howling, just exactly in the same way that a four-legged kind of dog or wolf might. He even sat like a dog, not like a man, and he howled up into the air as my girlfriend backed us out of there, bawling her eyes out. I wonder if he was howling because she was crying. I never understood why it stopped beating on the car and howled instead. I've read up on howling and wolf behavior for a long time now, but no matter how much I read, nothing about howling really makes sense to me. I don't think it only has one meaning, and I think they do it for a lot of other reasons besides just calling others of their species over, or whatever you read online. I just don't understand the full reason this one was acting like that and letting us escape. Once the girl was crying behind the steering wheel, the dogman was howling and whining, but staying in place and allowing us to go. When we got onto the road, the girl drove us at almost the speed limit, down a ways on the road, then pulled off again and fell into an emotional crying jag. I got myself up and out of the back seat somewhat slowly and uncomfortably, then managed to somehow bend my body back behind the steering wheel as the girlfriend scooched over. I would have rather let my back rest a while longer, and there were a few scary moments driving, but I did get the girl home. As the car idled in front of her family's house, I watched her walk down the path to her front door. She turned and waved before entering. Then, a look of horror crossed her face, and she ran inside quickly. Turning to my left to see what had frightened her, I saw that same mud-covered golem of a dogman bursting from the yard across from her house, making a beeline back for my father's car. He had somehow followed us all the way there. Once the crying girl was out of that car, his howling time was done, and his attacking time had returned. It was as though the dogman had some personal problem with me. I floored it, screeching out of that neighborhood so abruptly that it actually sped up my breakup with that girlfriend. I was loud enough that her parents heard it and thought far less of me for being a hot rodder. It also left tire tracks in front of the house that the girl's father was ashamed of and used to try to wash off with his garden hose. But I got away from that dogman before he messed up my dad's ride any further, so I count it as a happy ending. I don't suppose you want to hear my stories about getting the car washed while my back kept locking up, so I guess we might be done here. I hope you like this enough to use on your show, because the only monster I ever saw in my life was the Mississippi mud mongrel.
If you want a coloring book full of monstrous delight, then give this a look. It'll give you a fright, right? Scary stories coloring book, werewolf coloring book. And just to make your mind explode, it's a digital download. All it costs is $2.09, and then you will be feeling fine. Coloring monsters today, hey, it's a coloring book, hooray. Okay, link is in the description.
This one took place during the later 70s in Michigan, and that's why we're calling it Detroit Dog City. The Michigan werewolf chases music fans. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I'm back with my penultimate dogman story, as there's only one more family cryptid encounter after this, which my surviving relatives are okay with me telling you, even an anonymous version of. This is another allegedly true tale told to me by my Uncle Henry, who was a big music fan on the Detroit rock scene of the 60s into, I suppose, the early 80s. That was when he entered his 30s and started to find other, less strenuous hobbies. This was before my time, so all I know about it is what he told me, or what I've seen for myself in some of the old photos and news clippings he's posted to his Minds and Locals pages. This story happened in the late 70s after a performance by the band Kiss at the Pontiac Silverdome, just north of Detroit. I've heard both New Yorkers and Michiganders sometimes call Kiss their local band, for whatever reason that makes sense to their generation. When this happened, though, the band was too big to play small clubs and was performing at much larger venues. I looked it up, and the show that my uncle is talking about had to be the July 13th, 1979 show in which Kiss was so popular that their opening act was Cheap Trick. I wasn't even born then, and I know the names of those two bands, so I'm imagining that show must have been mind-boggling to my Uncle Henry and his buddies back in the summer of 1979. Now, Henry and his friends decided to drive home on Route 24, which is the Dixie Highway over there as you drive north. There are no lights on that road, but the guys were in the mood to tell ghost stories and spooky tales. Not true stories, but just like campfire stuff. So they took the dark road, which in places is residential, then commercial, and then starts to become more suburban, and eventually countrified. It starts to look, in the darkness, like a place you might encounter Bigfoot, or a road ghost, or who knows what, so I can imagine it being a good place to tell creepy stories to each other. In other words, the guys had worked themselves up into being scared before the dogman even put in his appearance. It makes me almost wonder if them being scared might have attracted the dogman to them in the first place. That is, some people think that dogman isn't looking to eat people, but rather to eat their fear. I'm not sure if that's a supernatural theory, a paranormal theory, or if that creature might be able to live off other people's emotions, the way my ex-girlfriend Beverly seemed to feed off getting me upset. Actually, this is not a theory, as my ex is almost definitely an emotional vampire. I lived through it, and I know it more than feel it to be true. So I suppose the theory is that the dogman is actually as negative a presence as my former girlfriend. Hard to believe he could really be that dangerous and horrible, but hey, like I said, it's only a theory. Here I am, talking about the dogman without telling you how he even made his grand entrance, according to my Uncle Henry. It was over by Heron Lake in the Holly Recreation Area. The creature walked, dripping wet, onto the road from the direction of the lake to the right. The car's driver had to swerve to miss the very tall man standing on his toes, seemingly wearing a wolf-headed mask and a wet ghillie suit, or possibly a gorilla costume. As they screeched around the beast, however, they saw that whatever that guy was out there, it was only similar looking to a human in terms of the chest and bipedal nature of its stance. It was not really a man at all, and that was not a mask it was wearing. Since they missed slamming head-on into it by inches, they did get a very close-up look at whoever or whatever that was. It seems to have been a Michigan dogman, if you ask me. It was a wolf-headed humanoid with feet more like a dog's hind legs than a man's. And as the young men motored on down the road, hoping to leave the monster man in their rearview mirror, the dogman stood and began running after them, still only using his two hind legs. Up north they all raced, past Rotten Manor, which in more recent times has become a popular Halloween-haunted attraction. When I go there, I try to imagine a real dogman chasing my uncle down the road past that place, and it's just too freaky to me. Imagining that a real cryptid event might have taken place just in front of that entertainment destination blows my mind. But this did happen at a different time in the past. It was late at night and probably pretty dark and desolate in those days. There's this area with woods and a lake on the right and a field to the left that they have the Renaissance fairs in during the summer, at least these days. That was where, for whatever reason, the dogman gave up pursuit, heading left through that field and disappearing into the woods. Maybe it recharged his fear batteries enough while feeding off my uncle and his friends, or maybe that was just his exit for home. If we pull back from the map over there, we can see there's a lake in that direction, although to be honest, there's a lake in every direction, much as central and northern Michigan. There's also woods and wilderness in that direction. Maybe the dogman was just bored of civilization and ran off to return to a world he's more familiar with and comfortable in. That's the last they saw of the beast that night.
Our executive producer today is Chris C, indubitably. She's rocking out the channel member plan, and that's how we made this show, man. Please join us in thanking Chris C for making this episode possible. In return, Chris gets to see our secret weekly uncensored stories unavailable to non-members. Alanda Goshen, Bigfoot Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC. When I got out of the service in the early 70s, there were a small group of us who decided we'd move to a location together and sort of look out for each other. I myself had no family to return to, and to one extent or another the same could probably be said about the other guys too. We all of us were from Western PA or Michigan, and somehow we all wound up finding jobs and homes to rent in the outskirts of Goshen and Shawville in Pennsylvania. We all lived near the woods and used to hunt north of there, where there are a few different legal hunting grounds. That was where we saw the creatures that I've gathered information about for you. Some of the guys and I are still in touch, 2 of us have passed on, and we all saw these creatures at least once each. They were real. At the time we called them Bigfoot or Sasquatch, and I'm still not going to say that's not what they were, but the difference between the Bigfoot we saw and the ones on TV shows and in movies was that the Bigfoot we saw had tall dog ears on top of their heads. Maybe what we saw were dogmen or werewolves and not Bigfoot, but they were large and bulky and seemed very ape-like to me. If they didn't clearly have dog ears, I would just say we had multiple run-ins with Sasquatch in Western PA. These were kind of weird animals or men or whatever they were. I mean to say they looked like animals covered in fur and with dog ears. They didn't always seem as though they were acting like animals though. I might be projecting with that last thing I said. They seemed intelligent to me, but it's not like I saw them pull out a notepad and do calculus. All I really saw them do was stare at me from the woods and stand very still for long periods of time. That doesn't actually require any intelligence at all, but I really truly did feel deep down inside that there was intelligence behind their stares. Again, that could have all been in my imagination. Maybe they were just predators studying me for weakness. Maybe they were scared of me, or annoyed at my presence. Maybe they were just curious. The area wasn't wired for cable yet in those days, so maybe they were just bored. I'm joking, but that's because this subject gives me the creeps. Still, I'm not getting any younger, and I want to organize all our stories while there's still time to do it. My wife won't let me put my name on it, but I've arranged for my lawyer to publish all this through Amazon with all the real names 1 year after The Last of Us has passed on. I wasn't the first to see the creatures, but I probably saw them the most times. I guess it was 4 times or 5. 3 or 4 of them were sightings of one creature, but I also saw 2 of them another time. I don't think I ever saw the same one twice, but it was always dark, so I could be very wrong about that. They always seemed different from the last one I'd seen, so I wonder how many there were in the area back in those days. Others saw them moving and walking. One even claims that, well, let's get to that when we get to it. I only ever saw them standing perfectly still and staring at me. Yes, it was the creepiest thing in the world, and yes, I did try to get photos, but I never succeeded. The first time I saw one of them staring at me from the trees behind my backyard, I went inside to get my camera, but it was gone when I came back out. After that, I started to carry my camera with me, usually around my neck when I went outside. One evening I saw that eye shine staring at me, and I reached for my flash camera, eager to take a photo. That was the first and only time I heard one of them start to growl. It was like almost a machine noise, a low-pitched growling, and it made me stop reaching for that camera and start slowly moonwalking backward away from the eye shine. Fortunately, the creature was as disinterested in conflict as I was. Once I no longer saw the eye shine, I turned and ran as fast as I could to get back into the house. There was one time when I had a girlfriend with me, and she saw the thing out there behind my house, eyes glowing like two flashlights almost. She was the one who started us all talking about them as possibly being space aliens. To her, that's what they were. She was terrified of the big aliens out back. That's what she called them, the big aliens. And that was when we all started wondering about them in that way too. Maybe they were just animals. Maybe they were intelligent animals like humans. Or maybe they were space aliens. We lived in a world for a while there where all three of those possibilities seemed equally real to some of us. And I still don't even know what the true answer is. None of us do. The dogman or a Sasquatch or a dogman Bigfoot or a Googway or whatever it was remains a mystery to this day. That is to say, the entire tribe or clan or species of them. I can't tell you if it was an invasion from space or just a rare animal species because we only saw them at night. And I'm telling you, they are a scary thing to run into in the darkness. Now, I've gathered together 4 testimonials to add to my own stories which I've just related. These are from other people who were around back in those days and who also saw these very unique dogman Bigfoot creatures. And before you ask, I never heard anyone talk about what kind of feet they had. I don't know if we were talking about the feet of a Bigfoot or of a werewolf. I personally never saw them move, and they were in the woods looking out at me each time. The ones who refer to them moving say the ground shook, so make of that what you will. Here's our first story from a fellow who prefers to remain anonymous. Testimonial number 1. Subject: encounter with a strange creature in the woods. Hey there, I thought I'd share a story from back in the 70s when I was out camping in the deep woods of rural Appalachia. It was one foggy morning, so thick you could hardly see your hand in front of your face. But that didn't bother me much. I was used to it, being out there in the wild. I was sitting by my campfire just taking in the quiet of the morning when I heard something stirring in the trees nearby. At first I thought it was a bear or maybe a deer, but then I saw it. This massive, hairy creature standing there in the mist, looking right at me with those big, glowing eyes. Now, you were with me overseas and you know I've never been one to scare easy, but let me tell you, seeing that thing sent a chill straight to my bones. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before, standing there tall and powerful, like some kind of an ancient beast from the mythologies. I sat there staring at it for what felt like hours, but it couldn't have been more than a few minutes. Then the sun started to break through the fog and I figured that was my chance to get out of there. I packed up my gear faster than I'd ever done before, leaving that campsite behind like it was cursed. And I've never been back since. Some folks might think I'm crazy, but I know what I saw that day, and I'm taking no chances with whatever that thing was lurking out there in those woods. Take care. Testimonial number 2. Hey, your email brought back memories I thought I'd long forgotten. Back around 72 or 73, my buddy Anton and I were out hunting in the Pennsylvania woods, just like we did every season. But that day was unlike any other. We were tracking a deer and we stumbled upon something we couldn't rightly explain. I saw 2 towering figures, unmistakably wolf-like, prowling through the trees. They were unlike any creatures I'd ever seen, tall and powerful with eyes that seemed to pierce through the mist. And there they were, standing tall amidst the trees. These creatures that I can only describe as Sasquatch-like, but not Sasquatches exactly. They had dog ears atop their heads, tall and pointy, like some kind of a crossbreed between ape and dog. Their fur was thick and dark, like the shadows themselves had come to life. Taller than any man I'd ever laid eyes on, with shoulders broad enough to carry a Harley Davidson. But it was their eyes that truly unsettled me, glowing with an otherworldly light that seemed to pierce straight through to your soul. They stood there unblinking, staring at us with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine, and there was this strange hum in the air, low, constant, like the earth itself was singing a sad song. But I thought the strangest part of all was the smell. It hit like a wave. The odor of matches burning on a cold winter's night. Sharp, acrid, and entirely out of place in those woods. And yet, despite the presence of these creatures, there was a silence that hung heavy in the air. A silence so thick you could cut it with a knife. Not a chirp from the crickets. Not a croak from a frog. Not a hoot from an owl. It was as if every living thing held its breath, in fear of what might come next. But Anton, well, he saw something different. He swore up and down that what he saw were Bigfoot-like creatures, but get this. According to him, one of them was gliding through the air, like it defied gravity or some such nonsense. I haven't seen him for years, but last time we spoke about it, he was still insisting he saw a levitating Bigfoot. I do believe him. I mean, I believe he really saw that. It's just that I not only saw them stomping around, I felt the ground under my feet when their big feet landed. Now, you might be wondering how two men standing right next to each other could see such different things. Truth be told, I've pondered that question many times myself. Some folks say it's the mind playing tricks. Others suggest it's the work of them cryptids themselves, messing with our heads. But the way I see it, maybe the woods got a way of showing us what we need to see, rather than what's really there. Maybe it's a reminder that there's more to this world than meets the eye. Either way, that day in the woods will stay with me till my dying day, and I expect Anton feels the same. Some mysteries just aren't meant to be solved, I suppose. Thanks for bringing back that memory. It's been a while since I thought about it. Thanks for writing, Felix the Cat. Now, Felix gave me the last address he had for his old hunting buddy Anton, and I wrote to him asking for his side of the story. I did eventually get a response, but unfortunately it was not from Anton, but from his widow. She wrote to us with the sad news of her husband's recent passing. She did, however, recall the story we were writing to her husband about, so I am going to include her email here. Testimonial number 3. Anton's widow. I hope this email finds you well. Unfortunately, I must inform you that my husband passed away before your letter arrived. I appreciate your reaching out, but he will not be able to respond. However, I did read your letter, and it stirred up my own memories of an incident he often recounted to me and to our family friends. This happened back in the early 70s when he was out hunting in the deep woods of rural Appalachia with his friend who you mentioned in your email. It was a foggy morning, much the way you described. He told me about encountering not one, but 2 large creatures resembling Sasquatch or Bigfoot, but with peculiar dog-like ears atop their heads. One of them approached him, lumbering toward him and shaking the ground when he did. The other one moved in a way that was much more eerie, like it was gliding rather than walking. Both stared at him through bright glowing eyes. My husband said he turned and ran, going back for his stuff later on. The encounter left a lasting impression on him, and he actually gave up hunting for almost 2 years before he got his courage back. That was before I met him, so I'm just telling you what he told me. I'm sorry I can't provide you more details or insights, but I did want to share his experience with you as best as I could. Thank you, and her name. I've saved my favorite story for last. This is from my buddy Cecil, who claims he got taken away by them. Well, let's just let him tell it. Testimonial number 4. Cecil gets seasick. This was a terrible experience for me, although I know you guys think it's funny somehow. It wasn't funny for me. I'll write it down for you, but don't ask me to tell it ever again. You can reread this if you want to hear it anymore. This is my final telling. So, I was not hunting when I had my experience like most of the rest of you. I was walking through the woods feeling sorry for myself. I felt down in the dumps and was in a loser's state of mind. I wasn't paying attention to what was happening around me, and before I knew it, a large hand was wrapped over my face, blocking my eyes, and I was dragged away suddenly. It was hard to breathe, and I was mostly focusing on trying to get air in and out of my lungs, while a big leathery palm was over both my nose and my mouth. I could only manage little gasps in and out, and we seemed to be moving at a very fast speed. Whoever had hold of me was leaping and running, and my body was getting banged and nicked from all sides for the entire time. When we finally stopped and I was dropped, I retched all over the ground and then passed out. I don't know if I was out for a minute or an hour, but when I woke up, I was in a dark place, like a cave or something. I saw my late grandmother sitting in the corner wearing dirty clothes, and I called out to her. I don't know if she could hear me. I sat up and noticed that Grandma was only one of about 8 or 9 people, who all seemed to be dazed, just sitting on the cave floor. And then these large dog-headed Sasquatch came in, sort of the same thing that the rest of you had also been describing seeing, and they seemed to be the masters of the humans, like they would order them around and make them do tricks. I was still feeling very nauseous and I passed out. When I woke up, I was asleep on the ground in the woods not 200 yards from my own backyard. No, I can't explain it, but I still had dried puke on my t-shirt when I woke up back home, so I know that it really happened. At first I was thinking that I had to go back and find that place because my grandmother was one of the captives there, right? I mean, who wouldn't feel they had to go back and rescue their grandmother? But as I started to come back to full consciousness, it hit me like a ton of bricks. My grandmother had passed on while I was still overseas in battle. So that's why this story isn't as funny to me as it seems to be to the rest of you guys. Like, what if I saw a glimpse of my own future? Like, what if that's what purgatory or hell looks like? Do you know what I'm saying? It's just not so funny to me because I was there. And I have no idea if that's where I'm going back to after I'm gone from this world. And maybe that's why I got brought back to the rear of my house like that. Maybe they made a mistake and just took me too early. I once started to look into the mythology of dog-headed entities, when I found out that they usually seem to be associated with death and the afterlife. It freaked me out, and I had to stop reading about the subject. I figure it's not really something I have to research. When the time comes for me to pass on, I'm sure I'll become an expert on it all in a flash.
It's a classic rollover, play with the scary stories, got it. It's a classic rollover, bloody and hysterical to go. Available in white, black, navy, gray, or pink. Link is in the description.
He turned me, then he left me. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I've got one for you that'll tear your heart out. And if my story doesn't, then I might personally, because I am a werewolf now, as strange as that looks after I type it. I fell in love with this man and he turned out to be... Well, let me just start back at the beginning when I first met this guy we can call Lowell, which was his middle name actually. I didn't know he was a werewolf at first, but he was a wolf right from the start. I heard what he thought about my appearance because he shouted it across the bar. It's so rare to find a man with testosterone that I actually sort of liked his approach. Well, maybe I didn't like it, but I liked him, and I forgave him for it. Didn't hurt that he was a good-looking guy. So it wasn't easy getting extricated from his arms to get home that night. But when he saw I was serious, he let me go. We made plans for our first official date, but I didn't really take my chances with him too seriously. I don't jump into the sack on the first or second date, so I expected Lowell to lose patience quickly. Well, he kept on dating me a fourth time even though I didn't bring him home, and I started to wonder who this guy was. He acted like a caveman, but he was also patient and a pretty good listener. I asked him if we could do things together during the day on weekends so that we could get to know each other. Like not date stuff, but hangout stuff. I just never got to know who he was on dates, as fun as going out with Lowell usually ended up being. With all the loud music, dancing, and partying, we didn't really get to do too much talking. So it was on one of our first hangout dates when Lowell casually mentioned that he was a werewolf. I burst out laughing and spit all over his face. It was gross and I felt so bad about it. He kept a straight face though. He kept insisting he really was a werewolf like the ones in the movies. Of course I eventually asked him to prove it, and he told me I might regret making that request. I figured this was some kind of weird joke that I wasn't getting the punchline of. That night I woke up to a tapping on my window, but my bedroom is up on the second floor. I figured it was a night bird or something and I tried to ignore it. Then I heard the window sliding open and I screamed and jumped out of bed. When I looked over at that window, there was a movie monster with glowing eyes climbing through, and I started pinching myself hard to wake up. Of all the times to suddenly learn lucid dreaming, I just wanted to wake up and see things getting back to normal. But instead, this monster covered in hair came through my window into my room, and somehow, when his scent hit my nostrils, I knew it was Lowell. He didn't smell the same way he did when he was a man. He smelled like an animal. But it was Lowell anyway. By then I had finally woken up enough to realize I was looking at a werewolf. When he told me that's what he was, I was not visualizing anything like this. I mean, this was neither wolf nor man, and he didn't resemble anything from those old black and white wolfman movies my brother used to watch when we were kids. This was some kind of muscle-bound furry man thing with some kind of head that I guess was sort of canine, although not exactly. He had a long snout the way a dog does, and his nose looked like a dog nose, but the face was also taller than a dog's head gets. He wasn't wearing any clothing, and he started taking mine off too. For the first time, I let him do it. And now let's pan the camera out the window to show the stars like in the old movies. One thing led to another, and I found that I really enjoy being the girlfriend of a werewolf. Most of the reasons why are ones I can't get into here. They're just too private. But mainly I got a rush off his power. And it made me feel powerful too. He could carry me on his shoulders and run so fast I could hardly breathe. But when he got down on all fours, he could run faster than cars on the highway. One time I was riding him through the woods one night and he ran out onto the highway, almost causing a huge accident. People were screaming at me from their cars, pointing at me riding the werewolf's back, as though this were a normal thing to do. I suppose I'm lucky none of them got it recorded on video. It was a fun and romantic life, and Lowell acted like it was going to go on forever. He was the one who brought up marriage, not me. He was the one who said I should become a werewolf like him. That was not my idea. I even remember the first time he brought up the idea of me becoming like him. I hadn't really known that was an option. I thought Lowell was just a different kind of human. Some kind of Superman who could change his outward appearance at whim. But it turned out he was once a normal, boring human like most of you listening to this. The only reason he became what he is that he got attacked by a werewolf and he survived the attack. Lowell was proposing attacking me. Well, sort of a controlled attack, I guess, but like a vampire, he would need to draw blood to turn me. He was going to have to bite me or cut me, he was going to have to lick the wound, and he was going to magically cure that wound. Then I'd be a werewolf sometime after that. He told me that you never knew how long it would take. Some people didn't change for months after a bite, while others would change before he'd even drawn his fangs back out of them. I'm not really a person who likes to take blind leaps. Well, I mean, I didn't used to be. Back then I had apartment insurance. I had life insurance. werewolves rarely take out insurance policies. I was not the personality type for being a werewolf. I think that was what attracted Lowell to me, to be honest. But it doesn't matter anymore. I haven't kept up my insurance payments in half a year. I just don't care anymore. I'm a werewolf now. I told Lowell if he wanted to make me a werewolf like he is, then he had to stay with me, as in forever. The way I told it to him was, I said, you break me, you buy me. I'll turn into a monster for you, honey, but then we're an inseparable pair forever from then on. I told him he'd probably prefer me as a human, and I tried to talk him down. But the more I talked about forever, the more drunk with love he became. When he started talking about marriage, I must have gotten tipsy too, because I agreed to let him turn me. It wasn't as painful as I expected it to be. Of course he was gentle about it. I became the werewolf that night for him. It drove him crazy. I've never so far become a full werewolf like him. A lot of the girls on the scene only seem to grow ears. Some grow fangs, some grow a tail. We all have to shave our legs a lot more frequently. We tend to stay in our partial werewolf form all night, every night. The men are almost like a different species, really. They have control over their changes, while we have to rearrange our lives around ours. For me, the main change is my ears, which are just dog ears full time now. I am glad I never got the tail, and I hope I never do. I get the fangs at night when I'm hungry, and I'm told my eyes can get wild during intimate moments. I'm scared of any more changes, since for me they seem so permanent. I have taken to collecting hats which are large enough to cover the ears. I have to work around the ears in terms of fashion. If I start to get facial hair, which does happen to some of the girls sometimes, I swear I'm going to stalk Lowell down and finish him off. That last statement is not something the old me would have ever said, even in jest. But the new me would actually find some way to punish that man if this situation degrades any further for me. If I change to the point where I can't pass as human any longer, all bets are off. That was not what I signed on for. And I also agreed to do this because he was to become my husband. Needless to say, we never married, and we never will either. I got sick in my job and they sent me home one afternoon. And when I walked into my apartment, Lowell was in there doing stuff to this werewolf girl that I wish I could wash out of my memory. You fill in the blanks yourself on that one, but take my word for it. This was not a scene you wanted to see your intended husband involved in. I knew the woman he was with. I knew her from the werewolf scene. She had seemed so stupid and shallow to me. And that was who he cheated on me with? After I altered my genetic makeup and DNA for him. The three of us fought in that bedroom. I could have killed both of them. And that's essentially what I tried to do in rage. Neither of them wanted to hurt me, at least not any further. But I can't say the same about myself. Of course, it's nearly impossible to kill a werewolf. We heal too quickly. You'd have to render us unconscious and then dismember the entire body before we woke up. At least that's what a girl at a werewolf club told me one night. Don't think I haven't thought about that in great detail either. So I kicked Lowell out, but I kept getting sick. I went to see a doctor about it, and the poor old guy looked like he was in shock when he ran tests on me. He told me that his instruments must be malfunctioning because he was getting readings concerning my heart rate and metabolism that were literally impossible. When he told me I was pregnant, it was almost an afterthought. He was so freaked out by the rest of what was going on with my body. I was and am pregnant, carrying Lowell's baby. Who knew how it'll turn out? Will it be human or not? With both parents now werewolves, I tend to side with not. I don't want to get into touchy subjects concerning pregnancy and the termination of such things. But this baby already told me that is not an option. I can feel what it's thinking, and it's thinking more than I am. It tells me what I should eat. It tells me what to avoid. Terminating the pregnancy is not an option when the pregnancy is ordering you around. I'm not saying it talks in my head exactly. I just know what it's thinking. I know what it's feeling. And I feel it too. But not as my own emotions or ideas. I know it's the baby, or possibly a guardian of the baby. I can disobey it if I want to, but it's trying to protect my growing child, and I'm not sure why I would fight against the health of my own offspring. So I tend to do what the feelings tell me to do. This is the limbo I find myself now in. The pregnancy only started to show a bit in the past few days. It's starting to get serious. Everyone will know soon. But even I don't know what it will be by the time I give birth to it. It won't be an ordinary child, I know that much for certain already. Other than that, though, I have no idea what's going to happen next. Oh, I was working on a sort of a diary entry about the werewolf nightclub scene around here. It's an after-hours bar and club scene, operating in places that the cops don't know about yet. I kind of had to stop writing it once the pregnancy took over my life. But I sort of edited it and fixed the beginning and ending, so now I think it might work for your show. I'm including it as an attachment to this email if you'd like to use that as well. And use it we will. Get ready for a peek into the nightlife of Midwestern werewolves, right after this important word from our sponsor, the Scary Stories Woolen Beanie. Take it away, girls. Werewolf nightlife can get hairy. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I was dragged out to the werewolf scene by a guy who tricked me into becoming a werewolf like him. Then he dumped me for another werewolf girl, and now I make the scene alone. Let me tell you, there are 5 werewolf girls for every 1 werewolf guy, so the guys rule the scene. Once a girl goes werewolf, ordinary men just don't cut it anymore. They just aren't man enough for us, no offense. So those werewolf men, they have a captive audience. I think that's why they turned so many of us, why there are so many girls on the scene. And every woman on the werewolf scene is gorgeous. They all have otherworldly, stunning beauty. The guys all have low foreheads and a lot of muscle under that fur. This is the scene. There are bands who play the scene, who also tour in the human world. Some of them are werewolves themselves, but others are just werewolf adjacent. But all of them have gorgeous werewolf groupies. These women look like runway models down to the dark rings under their eyes from malnutrition. It's true that werewolves need to eat things as they are dying to be truly healthy, and few of these girls have the stomach for that. To look at them, I'd say they don't have stomachs, period. Most of the girls don't transform as much as I do, and I don't transform to the extent of most of the males. I think that's why they don't bite us ladies too deeply. They like us half-human, and no match for them in terms of strength and speed. I think it also entrances us with them in general. Nobody wants a normie human anymore once you've had a wolfman. Heck, you might damage a normie man. They're fragile. And so there's a lot of competition among a lot of the women for relatively few men on that scene. It can get savage sometimes, but usually the women just try to outmaneuver each other and stab each other in the back. The werewolf men laugh at us when we fight over them. It entertains them. But then they always force us to make up with each other just to start the bickering and motion all over. Kind of like a live-action sitcom with us as the butt of all the jokes. You can't have character progression in a sitcom because everything needs to return to start before the final commercial break. That's what it's like on the werewolf scene. Endless repetition of the same arguments and intrigues and romances and affairs and violence, with nobody ever learning any lessons. Nobody ever grows as a person. And nobody ever matures. Everybody just bickers for what, to normies, would probably seem like an eternity. I mean, the guy who turned me looked maybe 36 or 37, but you'd laugh if I told you what I'm starting to believe his actual age is. So we age much more slowly, too, at least while we're in the werewolf form. So whenever my little dog ears are up on top of my head twitching around, that means my aging is almost halted, supposedly. I'll get back to you in 50 or 60 years to confirm that part. I'm already beginning to feel as though I understand why Lowell promised me that he'd stay with me forever. I know now he never meant any of it. He just thought I was hot and he wanted to add me to the stable of beautiful werewolf women on his scene. He told me what he needed to tell me to get me to do what he wanted. He might have stayed with me longer if I hadn't caught him cheating, or maybe he let me see on purpose. I don't think it mattered to him either way anymore. He had turned me and his job was done. It sounds cold to describe, but now that I'm like him, at least sort of, I can understand how he could disregard the feelings of some normie woman. He knew he was granting me a greatly extended life, and in the end, maybe it wasn't as unfair a trade as it first seemed to be. It is true that werewolves do understand more than normie humans, if for no other reason than we live in two worlds. But we also have stronger senses than humans, and we think faster. That's why we're such great hunters. We look faster, see better, smell better, hear everything, and then we can move faster than anything else alive for short bursts. Well, maybe not alligators or some snakes, but those don't live up in my part of the world. By the way, if you couldn't tell, I'm not one of the werewolf women who is afraid to hunt and to eat meat. I know YouTube is squeamish about that kind of thing, so I'll stop there. But I would advise you to avoid the werewolf scene if you're a vegetarian of any variety. You will either find yourself falling off the wagon, or you will become very sick because wolves need to eat meat. We aren't carnivores, that is a mistake to say. We are omnivores, just like humans. But the main part of our diet does tend to come from meat when times are good. Or even when times are bad to those of us wily and desperate enough. And that's a glimpse into what I've been seeing, thinking, and feeling in my early days of being on the scene of the werewolf underground. And so now let's jump into this collection of short dogman stories too long for YouTube Shorts. And the first one is entitled, How the Dogman Drove Me Insane. It's been many years now since that fateful day, but the memories are still as vivid as ever. I was a successful man with a loving wife and a great job. Life was good, or so I thought. It was a warm summer day, and I was out for my afternoon walk when I saw it. A dogman. I had heard stories of these creatures, but I had never actually seen one before. It was standing there in the woods, looking right at me. At first I didn't know what to do. Should I run? Should I stay? The creature just stared at me, and I was frozen in place. Then, just as suddenly, it was gone. That's when it happened. Something inside me just snapped. I couldn't think straight anymore. I couldn't focus on my job or my marriage. All I could see was that creature, and it haunted me day and night. I lost my job, and my wife left me. She said I was like a different person, that I wasn't the man she had married. And she was right. I wasn't. Something had changed in me, something that I couldn't control. For years I tried to forget about that day, to put it out of my mind, but I couldn't. The image of that dogman looking at me just kept coming back. I started to wonder if it was all in my head, if I had imagined the whole thing. But then a few years back, I heard about a group of people who had seen similar creatures. They called them werewolves, and their stories matched mine almost exactly. That's when I knew I hadn't imagined it. That creature was real. It was most likely a native shaman, transformed into a wolf. It's too late for me now, though. I'm an old man, and my life has been destroyed by that one fleeting glance from a dogman in the woods. But maybe my story can serve as a warning to others. Beware of the things that lurk in the shadows. They may seem harmless, but they have the power to change your life forever. Dogman in Indiana. I thought I was prepared for everything when I went hiking in Yellowwood State Forest in Brown County, Indiana. I had proper gear, enough food and water, and I knew the trails like the back of my hand. But nothing could have prepared me for what I saw that night. It was getting late, and I knew I had to set up camp soon. I had found a good spot by the creek, and I began to set up my tent when I heard a rustling in the bushes. I assumed it was just a raccoon or other small animal, so I didn't pay much attention to it at first. But then the rustling became more persistent and louder. I remember turning toward the noise and feeling a sense of dread wash over me. It wasn't a raccoon or a deer. It was the dogman, and that dogman was levitating about 10 feet off the ground. Its eyes were glowing yellow in the dark. It had the body of a man but the head of a dog, and its fur was shaggy and brown. It was staring straight at me, and I knew I was in serious trouble, being stared at by a supernatural levitating dogman. I barely had enough time to react before it let out a deafening howl. I don't know if it was in my imagination or real, but it seemed to shake the entire forest, and I felt it would be the last sound I would ever hear. But then something even stranger happened. The dogman began to descend back to the ground, but its eyes never stopped glowing. It looked like it was disappearing into thin air. Moments later there was nothing there but the sound of the wind and the rustling of leaves. I was paralyzed with fear, and I didn't dare move from my spot. I stayed there in my tent listening to the sounds of the forest until the morning. When I finally emerged, I knew I had to leave that forest immediately. I never went back to Yellowwood State Forest again. I never told anyone about what I saw that night. But I know that what I saw was real. The dogman is out there, and it's not something to joke about. Dogman on Clinton Road. I had always been fascinated by the supernatural and urban legends, so when I heard about Clinton Road, I knew I had to make the drive. The road is infamous for its ghost stories, including the story of the phantom truck that drove off the road into the ravine, never to be seen again. It was said that the driver of that truck still roams the road. As I made my way down the winding road, my nerves were on edge. The dark trees loomed ominously overhead, and the silence was palpable. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end at every noise, and I was almost too scared to keep driving. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a massive creature charged out in front of my car. It was much larger than any dog I'd ever seen before, and it had the features of both a dog and a man. The creature let out a terrifying growl as it ran towards me, and I swerved to avoid it, driving off the road nearly to my death. I lost consciousness for a brief period. Then I awoke in the driver's seat in a panic. My heart was racing, and I was shaking with fear. I looked around, but the creature was gone, with no trace left behind. I tried the engine and it worked, so I backed out of the hole I had driven into and continued down the road, my eyes glued to the darkness, waiting for the next encounter. As I reached the end of Clinton Road, I knew that I had fulfilled my curiosity, but I also knew that I'd experienced something that I would never forget. The memory of the dogman charging out in front of me loomed large in my mind, and I knew that I would never be the same again.
If you want a coloring book full of monstrous delight, then give this a look. It'll give you a fright. Scary stories coloring book, werewolf coloring book. And just to make your mind explode, it's a digital download. All it costs is $2.09, and then you will be feeling fine. Coloring monsters today, it's a coloring book, hooray. Okay, link is in the description.
Dogman in Chaldean Town. As I walked down the abandoned and overgrown Exeter Street in Chaldean Town at night, I couldn't help but feel like I was walking through a post-apocalyptic wasteland. The houses are all gone, replaced by fields and bushes and trees. And as I started to pick up my pace, something suddenly jumped out at me from the bushes. At first I couldn't quite make out what it was. It looked like some sort of filthy, diseased-looking dogman. This creature had mangy fur, bloodshot eyes, and razor-sharp teeth, bared in a menacing snarl. It was a fearsome sight, and I froze in terror, hoping that it wouldn't attack me. But I could tell that this dogman was not to be trifled with, and that I needed to act quickly if I was going to escape. The dogman let out a low, guttural growl and crept closer, circling around me like a predator sizing up its prey. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, and my hands were shaking as I reached into my pocket for something that could fend off this monstrous creature. But all I could find was a broken piece of rusted metal, and I knew that wasn't gonna be enough. Suddenly I remembered something I had heard about dealing with wild animals, making a loud noise to startle and scare them off. So I sucked in a deep breath, and I screamed as loud as I could, flailing my arms wildly to make myself seem bigger and more menacing than I actually was. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the dogman turned and bounded off into the darkness, leaving me standing there, panting and sweating with relief. And as I stumbled my way out of the overgrown Exeter Street and into the safety of 7 Mile Road, I couldn't help but shudder at the thought of what might have happened if I hadn't acted quickly. The experience had taught me a valuable lesson about the dangers of venturing into decrepit and abandoned places alone, especially at night. Dogman reached into my tent. I'd never really thought that much about Dogman before that night I was camping in Michigan. I had heard some stories about them, but I always thought they were just tall tales. But now I'm not so sure. It was dark and quiet, with nothing but the sound of crickets in the background. I was settling into my tent, getting comfortable for the night, when I heard something rustling outside. I thought it was probably just an animal like a raccoon or a possum, so I didn't pay too much attention. But then I heard something move closer. I could hear the sound of something sniffing around my tent. And then I saw a canine-looking head appear outside the entrance. It was a very, very large wolf, much bigger than any wolf I had ever seen. I think it was a dogman. I froze, not knowing what to do. I tried to remember what I had read about them, but all I could think of was that they were strong, fast, and aggressive. I didn't know what it wanted, but as it stuck its head into my tent, I realized what it was after. My bag of beef jerky that I had left open. I had put it close to the entrance of the tent, thinking that it would be easy to reach if I needed a snack. But now that dogman had taken notice, and he was trying to snag it from me. I tried to pull it away, but that dogman was too quick, In a flash, it had snatched the bag and disappeared into the night. I sat there for a few minutes, stunned, trying to process what had just happened. I couldn't believe that a creature like that could even exist. I know that I'll never forget this encounter, and the next time I go camping in Michigan, I'll be sure to pack a few extra bags of beef jerky, just in case. Dogman and the UFO. I went out for my evening constitutional, and I saw something very strange. Now, I'm not saying that dogmen are from outer space or anything crazy like that. All I'm saying is that I saw a strange light in the sky, and I felt a weird sudden warmth in the night, which was hard to explain. It was a dry heat, like you were indoors in the winter, when I was actually outside on a cool spring evening. The strange lights flashed over from my left to my right, and then count 1, 2, 3, and bam! Out of the woods to my right comes this crazy-looking old dog, running upright like a man. And he was running scared. Something spooked that big old pooch. And since he was a lot bigger than I was, I'm going to say that he spooked me, too. I knew he wasn't chasing me, but I ran back the way I came anyway. I had had enough of walking for that one night. Dogman, outside the cabin. When I first saw the cozy little cabin nestled in the Wisconsin woods, I couldn't believe how cheap it was. It was perfect, just what I was looking for. After a little bit of digging, I discovered that the previous owner had been trying to sell it for several years, but no one seemed interested. I can't imagine why, I thought to myself. It wasn't until I was unpacking my first few boxes that I started to notice some strange things happening around my house. Late at night, I would hear something scratching at the windows, and I would hear footsteps outside my door. Being from the city, I just assumed that it must be some kind of wildlife, perhaps a raccoon or a coyote, something I wasn't familiar with. One night as I was getting ready for bed, I glanced out of the window, and I saw something that made my blood run cold. It was a creature, hunched over on 2 legs, with glowing eyes and long pointed teeth. It looked like a monster straight out of a horror movie. At first I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but as I watched it slink away into the darkness, I realized what I had seen. A dogman. Suddenly, all the pieces fell into place. I understood why the price on the cabin had been so low. People around here knew about these creatures, and it seemed that everyone but me was terrified of them. As the days passed, my fear grew. While I never saw the dogman again, I knew that it was still out there, watching me. I slept with one eye open and my phone nearby, ready to call for help at the first sign of trouble. But as time went on, I began to appreciate the quiet of the woods, the rustling of the leaves, and the chirping of the birds. I started to feel like maybe, just maybe, the dogman wasn't as frightening as I had thought. Perhaps it was just misunderstood. Since then I have caught glimpses of the dogman outside my window, but I no longer feel fear. I feel a sense of peace, and a sense of harmony with nature, and with its many strange and terrifying creatures. I'm in love with a werewolf. I never thought I would end up in this situation, in love with a werewolf. It all started when I met Jake at a friend's party. We hit it off immediately, and before I knew it, we were dating. Things were great between us, but there was always something strange about Jake. He was always disappearing at odd times, and there were occasions when his behavior was erratic. I started to wonder if there was more to him than met the eye. Then one night I saw it. The transformation. It was terrifying, and I was frozen with fear. But then I saw the same kind, loving eyes looking back at me from the wolf's body. I knew then that it was still Jake. I was frightened and I didn't know what to do. How could I love someone who turned into a wild creature each month? But I couldn't leave him. I loved Jake with all my heart, and I couldn't bear to think of living without him. So I stayed and I learned everything I could about Jake's condition. I found books on werewolf mythology. I talked to other people who were in similar relationships, and I even went to support groups. It was hard, but I never gave up on him. Over time, I learned to accept Jake for who he was. We worked together to find ways to manage his condition through exercise, meditation, and special diets. It hasn't always been easy, but we've been making it work. I know that there are those who would judge my choice to stay with a werewolf, but I love Jake too much to care. He is my soulmate, and I will stand by him no matter what. Our love may not be conventional, but it is real, and that is all that matters. Cabin in the Harrisburg Woods. I've been living alone in a cabin in the woods outside of Harrisburg, PA, for almost a year now, and I've already had 3 encounters with the dogman. People might think I'm crazy, but I know what I saw. The first time was late at night, and I was outside chopping wood. I heard a rustling in the bushes behind me, and when I turned around, I saw the creature standing there. It was about 7 feet tall, way taller than me. It had the body sort of a man, but covered in dog fur, and that head was 100% dog. Its fur was a sandy brown, and its eyes glowed yellow in the night. I froze, not knowing what to do, and it just stared at me, then turned and walked away. The second time I saw it was a few months later. This time I was out hunting, and I heard a strange noise coming from the opposite direction of where I was going. I followed the sound, and I saw the dogman running through the woods. It was fast and agile. The third and most recent sighting was just a few weeks ago. It was late at night again, and I was getting ready for bed when I heard a growling outside. I looked out the window, and there it was, the dogman. This time it was much closer to my home, and it was staring right at me. I began to hear a low howl, and I felt a chill go down my spine. I know I'm not the only one who's seen this thing. Other people in the area have reported similar sightings, and it's got me wondering what it is and where it came from. All I know for sure is that I'll be keeping a close eye on those woods from now on. The dogman. Outside the cabin. I was sitting by the fireplace enjoying the warmth and flickering light against the walls of my cozy cabin. It was already late, and I was preparing to retire for the night. Suddenly, I noticed something peculiar outside the window. It was too dark to tell what it was at first, but then 2 glowing amber eyes caught my attention. At first I thought it was just some stray dog passing by, but then I noticed the sheer size of this animal. It was enormous, and something about its presence felt off. Its eyes glowed with an eerie intensity, and it felt like it was watching me. My heart began to race as I realized what I was seeing. I had heard stories of these creatures before, stories of dogmen. My eyes were glued to the window, and I could feel my hands shaking as I struggled to reach for the nearest weapon I could find. As I sat there alone and vulnerable in the woods, I knew I had to be cautious. The dogman was still there, and while it wasn't doing anything particularly threatening yet, I knew that it could attack at any moment. I needed to stay alert and keep myself as safe as possible. I sat there for what felt like hours, unsure of what to do. The amber eyes continued to glow in the darkness, and my mind raced with the knowledge that I was not alone in those woods. Eventually, I couldn't see the eyes any longer, and the dogman disappeared. I knew I had been lucky, but I also knew that I could not risk another encounter with such a creature. I made a mental note to stay vigilant from that moment on, knowing that the woods were dangerous and that anything could happen at any time. Dogman inside the cave. I was exploring a cave, a deep and dark tunnel that seemed to go on forever. The air was damp and chilly, and my footsteps echoed throughout the cavernous space. Every few steps I would hear a drip of water, the sound reverberating through the air around me. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end as I stepped deeper into the cave. The echoes were beginning to make me nervous, as though something was following me. Suddenly, as I made my way through a narrow tunnel, I found myself surrounded by several creatures. Dogmen. My heart started to pound in my chest as I took in their appearance. They were hunched over, with mangy fur and sharp teeth, and their eyes glowed with a menacing light. I could smell their musty scent in the air, and the sound of their low growls resonated around me, bouncing off the cavern walls. I was trapped, surrounded on all sides by these ferocious beasts. My only option was to stay still and hope they didn't attack. I was frozen, unsure of what to do. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears as I stood there, vulnerable and exposed. The dogmen started to close in on me, their eyes focused on my every move. As they got closer, my mind raced with possibilities. Fight or flight seemed to be the only option, though not so clear in the dark cave. Then with one howl, for some reason, they all fled, running off into the deep darkness of the cave, taking the echoes of their howls with them. Confused, but relieved, I let out a deep breath, grateful to have survived. It was a narrow escape. I knew I needed to get out of that cave as quickly as I could, before any of those dogmen came back to get me.
What bigger than a waffle on your plate? A waffle on your head could be just great. It's the waffle beanie from NYC. Scary fashion for spring, you see. Black, birch, camel, navy, rust or heather gray. One of these colors is just your way. Wear this hat and you'll be it. Link in the description for this vid. Get your own scary stories, waffle beanie today. Feel 2077. Donate to us using Super Chat. Feel 2077. It's really where it's at. Please allow me to introduce her. Philo is this episode's executive producer. If you'd like to be one too, then listen to Hank. All he says is true.
Thanks, Biggie, and thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.